Good evening and a warm welcome to each one of you who has joined us this evening. This is the sixth online session of Adhoc RC1. I'm Leena, convener of the RC, and we are delighted to host this very important panel discussion in collaboration with Research Committee 2, which is on studies on marriage, family, and kinship. And I'm so glad that Professor Deepti has joined us. Just a little bit of introduction. Professor Deepti is a convener of RC2, and we're happy to have her here. Just a little bit of introduction on our RC. Adhoc RC1 is on pedagogy, teaching, and learning. That was formed last year, and we just completed 1 year. Now, this RC aims to provide an enabling space to listen to and have conversations around theoretical and empirical work, methods and methodologies, teaching practices and reflections related to the broader fields of teaching and learning sociology. We focus a lot on the classroom and how it can be a space of immense possibilities, but we also move beyond the classroom to sites of learning outside the classroom. We like to interrogate, revisit, reimagine, and have conversations across disciplines. To the participants who have joined us today, we invite you to join our Adhoc RC1 and be a part of our deliberations. Over 1 year, I think we've had sessions on sociological imagination, exploring a pedagogic purpose, interdisciplinary reflections, queer pedagogies, and we hosted a panel, student panel too. And very recently, last Saturday, we had a book discussion that centered around the contradictions and paradoxes of which are inherent in the research process and why it is important to discuss these in the classes on research methodology. And that was a very, very engaging discussion that we had only last Saturday. Today, we have a much awaited panel discussion on family studies today, reflections on pedagogy. And we have a very distinguished panel here. Let me have the pleasure of introducing them. Our first speaker on the panel is Kamala Ganesh. She is former professor and head Department of Sociology, University of Mumbai. Her field of interest include gender and kinship, women's history and archiving for women, culture and identity, and Indian diaspora studies. She has been scholar in residence at Shivnadar University and visiting professor at Leiden University, Netherlands, and Münster University in Germany. Most recently, she has been Professor M.N. Srinivas Chair at Institute of Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. She has over 50 published papers and books, and the most recent one includes Betwixt and Between, Anthropology's Engagement with the Sciences and Humanities in Geeta Chadda and Rennie Thomas's edited volume on mapping scientific method, disciplinary narrations. I welcome you, ma'am. Our second panelist is Professor Nilika Mehrotra. Nilika is a social anthropologist teaching at the Center for the Study of Social Systems, Jawaharlal Nehru University. She is also editor of the journal Indian Anthropologist. She has been a Fulbright senior researcher at the University of California, Berkeley, between 2013 and 14. She has authored the book Disability, Gender and State Policy, Exploring Margins, and edited Disability Studies in India, Interdisciplinary Perspectives. Besides, of course, numerous research articles in the areas of women's movement, gender, disability, and development studies. We're very happy to have you with us, Nilika. And of course, we are joined by Professor Rukmini as the moderator. She's Professor and Dean, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, New Delhi. We look forward to an engaging session. And without further ado, may I invite Rukmini to take this forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Leena. Good evening, all. It's an absolute honor to be moderating this session with two stalwarts, one of whom has been my teacher in JNU and one who has not directly been a teacher, but has indirectly taught so much on both kinship as well as women's movement, Professor Nilika Mehrotra and Professor Kamala Ganesh, respectively. It's an absolute honor to be conversing with the two of you. And I want to thank the two RCs, the two RC conveners, Professor Leena Pujari and Professor Deepti for asking me to do so. It's also delightful that there are friends who are here, and it's always wonderful to have discussions with familiar faces around on something as topical and important as family studies today, reflections on pedagogy. One cannot emphasize the importance of having a panel like this today, primarily in a larger context where marriage, kinship, and family studies, which has been understood to be the core and the backbone of the discipline of sociology and also anthropology, seems to be disappearing from many departments of sociologies. And for some of us, that is definitely a matter of huge concern as to what are these other seemingly more important, sociological stuff, which is overtaking something as fundamental and foundational as kinship and family studies. It's also important to record that this conversation is happening also in the backdrop of the International Day of Families, which was on the 15th of May. And the 2025 theme on the International Day of Families was family-oriented policies for sustainable development. And probably we'll have a chance to talk about questions of policy as we move ahead in the discussion. I want to take a few minutes to talk about, in some sense, give a layout to many people here who are here, who may be familiar with the larger terrain of sociology of family and kinship studies and may not be. Some of the, and I think I'm trying to do this also from the perspective of how do we usually teach family studies in classrooms, especially in departments of sociologies. And so while on the one hand, there is a larger, Western anthropological tradition of studying family through, as we all know, Henry Morgan, Levi Strauss, Radcliffe Brown, Gail Rubin, if there is a feminist touch to the course curriculum, but also David Snyder, from where there's a certain turn that happens in the anthropological understanding of kinship studies to, of course, Janet Carston and her extremely important work around chosen families, which and the very important book called Beyond Kinship, which in some ways, also determines and takes us into queering the pitch of family studies, where we can actually bring in scholars like Judith Butler or Eve Kosofsky within our understanding of family and kinship studies. In the Indian anthropology, sociology traditions, while teaching courses on family and kinship, I personally always start with Iravati Karve, Kinship Organization in India, one of the most significant works cutting across the length and breadth of the country, doing actually such important field work in order to arrive at differences and distinctivenesses of different cultures and communities with respect to not just terminologies and structures associated with family, but also very interesting relational terms, that we actually see within family and kinship. G.S. Ghuriye, another, very important anthropologist, sociologist to keep in mind. I personally always use A.M. Shah's, essay on family policies in India. I actually feel that that's one of the earliest writings connected with questions of policy. And very interestingly, A.M. Shah actually takes us within this particular essay to very contemporary questions on elderly care, something which, today is becoming a very important field of research. Kim Kapadia has been someone who has also been studied quite a bit, primarily also because we see changes in the family structure coming in. 70s and 80s Indian sociology, anthropology is so much about reasons for the breakdown of the joint family to the nuclear family. I remember much of my own undergraduate and postgraduate learnings on kinship and family was around what were the reasons for the breakdown of this joint to nuclear. But basically engaging with questions of structures, with questions of, in some ways, crisis, with which, from where it began to where we are, to, one of the really very significant, in fact, Bangla books, if I may take the liberty to do so, has actually been Pradip Bosch's writing on family. And it's one of the books saying that in the last about 8-10 years, there are two books that I would like to make a note of. One is Critical Themes in Indian Sociology, published in 2019, Sanjay Srivastava et al. Edited, which had two chapters. One was called Contemporary Intimacies. And in some ways, I probably would want to propose that there is a change that is also happening in the terminology. And that is something that we are seeing in the usage of the term intimacy with respect to questions of kinship, with respect to questions of emerging relationships. And a second chapter here was Conjugality and Marital Dissolution in Historical Perspective. So somewhere questions of crisis within marriage, divorce has been and yet not been at the heart and the center of family and kinship studies, but you see it coming within the discussions of sociological literature. The most recent book edited by Anuja Agrawal in 2025, which is called Family Studies, has a very interesting subsection within it, which is on trust and betrayal. And within that section, very interestingly, friendship in kinship is something that is being talked about. And we also realize, those of us who are teaching family kinship these days, we see how students also want to actually talk about questions of friendship as family, friends as kins. Again, nothing real, in some ways, not really the first time that it is being talked about. I'm actually remembering Kapadia's work around breakdown of family and actually indicating that there are relationships in the nature of family that develops. And, today we are probably seeing it in a more defined way as our students do, hashtag friends as kins. Another section which is there in this recent edited book is new methods through which family can be studied. And there's a very interesting essay on digital mothering, and also another essay around displaying family online. So how do you actually use online, actually websites? And this is an essay on Syrian Christian families. And how do you use these online websites, YouTube channels, to talk about family histories? So new discourses around both methods and themes seem to come up. What I want to end by highlighting is that family kinship studies in Indian sociology classes has never really been static. It has always evolved and transformed. And it has also been impacted definitely by women's studies, women's movement in the 70s, 80s, 90s, by questions of caste and disability and queer from the post-1990s. And today, in some ways, I feel that it is also influenced by conceptualizations that are coming probably from the discourses on disability, probably from discourses on elderly around questions of care and companionship. So it has never really been static. It has always evolved to the needs of the time. And in some ways, that is what makes it interesting, but that is what makes it also challenging to teach as a paper. And, very recently, someone actually said that how do we cover all of this in a course? And I think as teachers, this is a question that I'm sure all of us encounter. And who better to actually hear how do we do this than our two experts? I want to end here by saying that both Nilika ma'am's and Professor Ganesh's two articles are part of a reading list of a course that I do in Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi. It's an MA course on relationships and affinities. So for Nilika ma'am, I use the paper Marriage, Love, Caste and Kinship Support, Lived Experiences of the Urban Poor in India, an Indian anthropologist piece, which was published in 2011. And Professor Kamala Ganesh's really wonderful essay, New Wine in Old Bottles, Family and Kinship Studies in Bombay School, Sociological Bulletin of 2017. So in some ways, while not really having had this conversation in physical or virtual mode earlier, I think I have been having the conversation with both of you through these two essays that I do in my course. But it is a delight to hear you. Over to you, Professor Kamala Ganesh.
Thank you. Am I audible? Am I audible? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Rukmini, and thank you, Leena, for organizing this. And I also see Anurekha and other members, Nilika, and other members of ISS, all of whom I haven't met, but I'm familiar with some of the names, and I think it's very nice. The chat box shows quite a few, 54 participants. So, I mean, kudos to you guys for making it happen in this way. 54 is quite a large number. And I think the idea of bringing together a very new articulation on pedagogy, because though family and kinship have been discussed so much, it's a very old topic in sociology and in anthropology. But to bring it together with pedagogy and also make two RCs come together, one prospective RC, I suppose, and the other one, it's nice. It calls for some kind of interfacing, which I think is wonderful, because family and kinship are very topics which are very, very interdisciplinary and interfield. And it can't be the preserve only of sociology or anthropology, even, it goes beyond that. So, and I also thank the president and the MC members and the RC conveners for initiating these kinds of meetings. Why is it important to reflect on pedagogy in family studies? Because though the topic is ubiquitous in sociology, the subject, and in anthropology, the subject has been around from the time the social science disciplines evolved. That is from the 1850s and 60s, when Morgan started his work on kinship. Since then, and there are good reasons why this is an important area of study, because it is one of the fundamental institutions of societies with linkages with all other institutions. And the family is the primary group for socialization and transmission. Kinship is among the fundamental organizing principles of society. It provides the basis for entitlements to material resources and social and symbolic capitals. So there are very good reasons why this topic and this subject and the course are important, among other so many other reasons that Rukmini put forward. But somehow, and I'm not very sure I'm in sync with Rukmini on this, probably because she has been in courses teaching and learning much later than me, and I have been there in this field earlier, when somehow the way it had been taught was in the case of family studies, initially we have to make some distinction between family studies and kinship studies, simply because family was the purview of sociology for historical reasons, and kinship was in the purview of anthropology. Though now I think there are a lot of bridges being built, yet they have a certain different historical legacies. So either the family studies, what I read, I was partially a correspondence student for my MA, and then went into PhD in University of Bombay. So my learning and teaching of family seemed to be, or the students' understanding anyway, seemed to be very commonsensical and descriptive at that time. It was, I'll go into it a little later. And in the case of kinship, it was so esoteric, so much divorced from any real things that one was familiar with. So there was some discomfort in me as to how come this subject, which is so important, is being taught in this way in the institutions that I was involved in. I cannot speak for all institutions. Sociology of the family and anthropology of kinship have always been treated separately in the literature, from the West. And family has been the domain of sociology, and kinship the domain of anthropology. Now in India and in Bombay University, we have put the subject together for many years, in keeping with Ghurye's prescription for sociology in India to be not to be distinguished too much from social anthropology. They were both treated within the same canvas. So in that sense, they are put together. They used to be put together. I'm talking about the 80s and 90s when I was a student, and then I became a teacher. So it used to be, the paper used to be called Family and Kinship, or Family, Marriage and Kinship. These were, though the topics themselves were separate. What you did a couple of topics on joint family and household and family and so on. And then when you came to kinship, you did something else. Those topics were separate, but they were put together somewhat uncomfortably in one paper. But this is in the past. Things are quite different now, as Rukmini has illustrated. In the earlier family and kinship studies, which is not completely gone now. I'm not saying that there is, earlier it was all like this and now it's all hunky-dory. That's not my point. There have been two underlying assumptions which one has to be aware of. That is, the family as a sealed unit. This has been an assumption that somehow it is a magical or a mystical or a place where all the wonderful things of humanity are kind of condensed into, and the ideal type. So it is sealed from the turbulence outside. It provides a cushion for the individual who is buffeted by the turbulence in the outside world. And the implication also that it was a largely harmonious unit. The discussions on harmony were not always explicit, but certainly there was an assumption that this was a place, a kind of a bulwark against all the other things that happen in the larger world. So this assumption, I think, is there even now, both in the commonsensical realm and to some extent in family studies. So, for example, domestic violence took a lot of time to be recognized because of this underlying assumption that family, somehow things would not be, could be worked out. It should remain in the family. The family always supports. This kind of assumption made it very difficult for feminist activists to take up domestic violence and highlight that the people who were closest in relationship and in roles and responsibilities to each other could perpetrate violence. That took a long time because of this underlying assumption. The other assumption of kinship, in this case, the kinship as a set of rules, and which are somehow fixed and immutable, that are eternal, that are part of the underlying value system of a society. this in some ways then made it very difficult to intervene legally or in other ways with certain customary practices which justified the discrimination against women, for example, or discrimination against the elderly, whatever. The idea of kinship as fixed and immutable, this underlay a lot of good work that has been done has nevertheless been on this basis. And in the Indian context, as Rukmini also pointed out, major discussions and major energy in the 1960s and 1970s and even in the 80s were about joint family and nuclear family. This was, in fact, many people, many students who came to the subject thought that that was what it was all about. And it was generally discussed in an extremely commonsensical way. So these assumptions, I don't know to what extent in the students' minds and in the general sociological mind, how far these have been removed. Though one has to say that, as Rukmini pointed out, there have been many developments, many evolutions that do question these assumptions. So this has been happening for several decades now. And how to capture these changes and how to convey these changes to the students in a way that it makes sense to them. It is very difficult to dislodge cherished views on family and so on. So in this, I think new pedagogies are very important, and I believe Nilika will talk much more in detail and insight about these pedagogical methods. I will talk more about the main changes that have happened conceptually in the field of family and kinship studies, and what they could then imply for pedagogy, but the methods themselves, I think she will take it up in detail. So the concerns of traditional sociology, Western sociology, let us put it, or in the West, had a lot to do with the Industrial Revolution and the separation of the workplace from home, the emerging nuclear family as best suited for the emerging capitalist society, and the conceptual framework of modernization, how the nuclear household, the emerging nuclear family and household was best suited for the modernizing framework and so on. This was one of the main concerns, the changing family in the West. This was the crux of the, you could say that early studies on the family. In India, this also then traveled. I won't talk about how, what happened in the West in sociology and anthropology, how they came to India, how they influenced Indian sociology, which is sociology plus social anthropology. I won't go into it here now. But the Eurocentric understanding of society and culture of the colonies was that the traditional joint family structure was inimical to change and progress, to evolution. And that the nuclear individual-based household was superior. This was a kind of an underlying assumption which Indian sociologists of that era, that is the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, tried hard to combat, because they felt that this was far too simplistic a way of looking at families and households. In this context, I think A.M. Shah's work is quite important. Rukmini mentioned it. His book is called The Household Dimension of Family in India, because this not only the colonial Eurocentric understanding, but also the excessive dependence on indology in early sociology also resulted in a valorization of joint family and seeing joint family where it did not exist in that kind of ideal type form. So there was a whole lot of literature with indology and colonial interpretations of family, which people like A.M. Shah did a lot to dispel, saying that conceptually one has to distinguish between household as the residential unit and family, which was larger, which is an institution that does not reside only in one household, which there is a network of households which are bound by kinship systems, and it is the totality of it that we mean by family. So in that era of literature, there was a lot of discussion on how you could live in a nuclear household, but you could also belong to an extended family ethos, where for certain areas there would be cooperation with the larger network. For some other purposes, only the nuclear household was taken into account. So the how confusion between household and family and kinship, household being a residential unit, family being an institution, and kinship as a principle of social organization, how these are related, how they what are the implications of that, and that the Indian family reality is much more complex and much more intricate than a simple understanding of change and disintegration of the joint family and the growth of nuclear family households, and alas, the loss of traditional values. This kind of a simple understanding was complicated, made more complex by this genre of sociologists. So I think we have to give them a lot of credit for bringing in the importance not of just the residential unit, but how one unit is related to another. What is the web of kinship that it is related to? What is this feeling of family? When does it work? And also, in this explorations, the idea of the harmony in the family was also beginning to be seen as a questionable idea. And you have worked quite early by people like M.N. Srinivas, who talked about conflict and conflict resolution in the joint family, and later by Amartya Sen, who talked about cooperative conflict, that yes, there is, family is a unit of cooperation and harmony, but at the same time, there is also conflict, so cooperative conflict, and some ideas of power relationships in the family, just a little bit in that time. So, and then the idea of the sealed domestic domain also started being questioned in this literature, in this evolving literature, because the influence of family on politics, on economics, on industries, nepotism, there are, I'm talking from the Indian context, there are too many things happening in real life in society that show that that domestic domain is not a sealed unit. It is connected to the larger world in both directions. The household and families are influenced by the prevailing laws of the land and what are the economic compulsions and the political compulsions, but they also influence in turn. So this from the family as a sealed and exclusive domain to its many interrelationships with other institutions, this is one evolving line of thinking about the family, in which family and kinship, both domains intersect. So we come to the feminist contribution. Feminist contribution has been important in several dimensions. I think you all, yes, like Rukmini talked about Iravati Karve, and indeed, yes, Iravati Karve was one of the, I would say, the earliest anthropologists in India who saw the kinship systems as directly connected to the cultural ethos and to women's, many aspects of women's position in the family. What were the kinship rules? How did they affect? They had kinship. She said that kinship rules are not only are they not immutable, they are not moral in nature, not only moral in nature, but they have very, very specific material dimensions to it. And she has done very good work on, I think it has really not been followed up by anybody in the way that she did it, which is that something that is very fundamental to Indian kinship systems, the contrast between the Northern Indian and the Southern Indian systems, the latter being based on cross-cousin and uncle-niece marriage, and what all this means to actually people who live in those systems. What are the implications for living in those systems? Iravati Karve has not been very elaborate. She has been pretty short on this, but very, very sharp. Very sharp in showing the material implications of kinship. Kinship not as something esoteric, but something with meaning and something which implications for real life situations. Now, Leela Dubey, I think, took up this idea and developed it much further with fieldwork. And she was inspired by Iravati Karve, I know. She told me so. So she saw kinship as furnishing the blueprints for entitlements in the daily business of living, as she called. So the access to the entitlement and access to resources like food, nutrition, education, to rights of inheritance, succession, residence, and to one's very identity, it is vested in kinship systems. It's vested in the family as the embodiment of kinship systems. And she has written considerably and very, very perceptively, ethnographically rich stuff on how socialization of women and men in patrilineal systems, how are they socialized into accepting certain ideas of femininity, masculinity, women as natural, as naturalized way. She has also worked on patrilineal systems, of course. It was part of her own experience. And I think she has worked in Gond society and in Rajput society, all patrilineal systems. But she has experience with bilateral kinship systems in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, in Indonesia. And she has worked in the matrilineal Muslim communities in Lakshadweep Islands. So she has this span in which she looks at, and in all of them, she is not solely interested in women, but she is interested in focusing a bit on women and gender. And she sees how patriarchy, which at that time when she was doing this work, I think she wrote about it in the 80s and 90s, though she did the work earlier. But at that time, at the later time when she was also a member of the Committee of the Status of Women in India. And when she saw this kind of very macro way in which patriarchy was being used as a kind of a catch-all, as a kind of a huge, she used it in it. She showed it in a much more nuanced way. She showed how different kinship systems, not that they did not have patriarchy, but they expressed their patriarchy in different ways, and women had differential rights in them. They were not all the same. And the amount of the agency of women in many of these systems was also variable. In other words, different kinds of kinship systems had different kinds of outcomes for women. Having said that, we could still work with the concept of patriarchy, but nuancing it much more to include agency and to include historical change and to include variation in space. So, I think after her, a number of women, because the time she wrote all these books, and the 90s and so on, that was when feminism and feminist sociology, feminist anthropology was also developing in a sharper way. So a number of feminists took up some of the ideas that she brought to our attention. And basically, I think the whole shift, not only by feminists, but predominantly by feminists, but there were others who were doing it, from focusing on harmony to focusing on power. This was the one major shift that happened in family studies and kinship studies. At the same time, the early feminist view of the family in India, the early, let us say in the 70s and 80s, was one of kind of unadulterated oppression. The family as the seat, as the fundamental seat of oppression. That view was then later nuanced much more by Leela Dubey and others, that the family continues to be, the family, meaning the household and the connected institutions of family, do continue to perform a role as a social security network, especially in our kind of countries where the state has not taken the primary responsibility for welfare. And of course, for the socialization and for the fundamental meaning producing actions of the family. So it is not entirely, you can see it as cooperative conflict as at this, as the seat of some oppression, but also some support. So this is a dual or multiple view of the family. So lastly, let me just briefly come to David Schneider's cultural approach to kinship, which you talked about, Rukmini, and that has had a very powerful impact on feminists and non-feminists. That kinship, which was seen as a biological, essentially as a biological, biologically constituted principle and entity, he showed in great detail how it was also it was a cultural construct, the cultural construct of kinship, which goes beyond biology. It is not pure biology. And we know that in the last 25 or 30 years, in a time and world where trans people and trans culture has gained some cognitive status, and reproductive technology has has got so honed so much, that the biologically based heteronormative family as the sine qua non of society, which was the assumption, common sense assumption, as well as the assumption of sociology and anthropology. That was the underlying assumption. That has been called into question, serious question. And so these new, some not so new, some new developments, we have to incorporate them into the pedagogy with suitable methods for ascertaining, for evaluating, for measuring, even measuring, because there are many areas of research in policy, in welfare work, in NGO work, where statistics are collected on the basis of household, on the basis of family, on the basis of questions like who is the head of the family. These are all questions that are not simple. If you have a knowledge of the current developments in sociology of the family and anthropology of kinship, you will know that these are not simple questions. On women's work, for example, when these questions are asked in the domain of the family or about the domain of the family, who answers, how they answer, how you ask the question, these have to be taken into account. And they have been taken into account. I think feminists have sensitized us to this. These have to, I think, form part of pedagogical methods. We will see how from Nilika. And also the gender violence in the domestic setting, the huge gender which has come to our notice now, has been unseen and unrecognized and dismissed. I think, what are the methods by which we can throw light on these, how to show them in some quantitative measure, not just qualitative, and how to sharpen terminology and distinctions, and yet build bridges between kinship and family and household, all these domains, and also see how other domains of intimacy might be, changes in terminology, as you said, domains of intimacy might take into account not just these, but also friendships, but also other kinds of relationships from between colleagues and so on. So whether we need to have a separate, very sharply demarcated field called family, or whether it runs into many other kinds of relationships. This is also a question that has been asked. So I think with this, I will stop, and I look forward to Nilika telling us some more about the pedagogy.
Thank you very much, Professor Kamala, Ganesh, for that very detailed discussion. We'll move over to Professor Nilika Mehrotra.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor to share the dais with Professor Ganesh. And I can see many family scholars in the audience, and especially Tiplut. Hello, Tiplut, because your work is so inspiring, and I continue to teach your work in my classes. And thanks to Leena for putting Leena and Deepti for putting this session together, and also to Rukmini for laying out really the the format for this discussion. And you have covered a great range of issues that I would have covered in my talk. Nevertheless, I'm going to really supplement to what Professor Ganesh has said, and I'm not going to repeat some of those things. So I'll begin with my career in teaching anthropology and sociology for last 3.5 decades. And it was in the beginning of the early 1990s that I started to teach a course on family and kinship at undergrad level in anthropology. And from there, I moved to teach several courses relating to gender and gender relations at D School and also in JNU. I have taught courses on family and kinship, which Tiplut had very, nicely put up, compiled. And I also teach a course at MPhil PhD level on gender relations. And family remains one of the key areas which I have tried to cover. So initially what first 10 minutes, what I'll do is to actually look at how in my courses I have tried to incorporate some of the things that have come in last 3 decades or so, especially in terms of literature on family studies. Initially, as I said, that when I started teaching family and kinship, we were largely teaching the subject from a very structure functionalist, perspective. So in our readings also at Delhi University, we were focusing more on Radcliffe Brown and Levi Strauss and less on Schneider, very little on Schneider, but of course, Veena Das's work, which is informed by, Schneider, especially Masks and Faces, was one essay that we continue to teach. Nevertheless, as I said, that what was dominant, perspective in the early 90s was structure functionalism. What was also missing from the course then was gender. So gender was, and I can give you an anecdote about how when I was given to teach this course, and I pointed out to one of the professors who had been teaching the course that where is gender here? And I was told, what is family and kinship got to do with gender? So, those were the days, and we have come really far from there. So, there was also, since I was teaching in anthropology department, what was also interesting was that there was a lot of literature on Northeast. So Northeast, and especially the family structures and functions in the Northeast, there was emphasis on a cross-cultural and comparative understanding of the family systems among the tribal societies. So about matrilineal societies, as I said, Tipluk's work was extremely important. Um, but over time, what I have seen is that, from structure functional approaches, we have moved very clearly uh, uh, to more phenomenological, more cultural approaches. Though I would still say that, in our courses, we try to cover as much as possible in terms of the basics, how to define family, what is its relationship with kinship and marriage, and so on. So the fundamental basic concepts really come from the classical works, that of Levi Strauss and Radcliffe Brown, and of course Schneider. Nevertheless, I would say that we have moved far away in terms of feminist interventions, and feminist interventions have been extremely important. Something which A.M. Shah also had to, acknowledge in his book "Family in India: Critical Essays," 1998, that something is missing in the family, studies in India, which is the intra-household dimension, intra-household dynamics. And it was feminists who actually brought in, the intra-household dynamics in a very, very powerful way. Professor Ganesh actually pointed out to inequalities, gender inequalities, and of course the violence against women as one of the key areas. But I also, used to teach, listen to the hero's words by Gloria Godwin Raheja and Anne Gold, where they use folk songs to actually teach, to learn about, subversion of kinship ideologies and the role of women. So I think that is one way I understood right from the beginning, that unless you look at the local realities, family which was being seen more and more as a kind of a Janus-faced institution, which was on one hand altruistic, on the other hand very oppressive. So I think uh, it was needed, and it was also required of feminist sociologists and anthropologists to bring in the nuances of the intra-household dynamics, which were very, very potently actually presented by a series of books, edited books, where, of course, Professor Ganesh was there, and Rajni Palriwala and Professor Dubey, and many others who actually, participated in producing literature on women and household dynamics, etc., and the strategies that they have in order to negotiate the relationships between and within the households. So I think the role of feminist critiques in highlighting the intra-household dynamics and the inequalities therein is one very, very important, aspect of how I have seen the course curriculum changing. Um Besides this gender division of labor, why housework or homework remains in the hands of women, why, gender division of labor, despite of feminist movements intervening in very important ways, remains the realm of women. And I remember Kamala always, saying that, cooking is not gendered. And this interface between the feminist, activist, and everyone, coming together and talking about some of these issues. On the other hand, socialist feminists, especially as the liberalization began in the Indian context. So Joy Ranadive's very important work on household where she was looking at the implications of economic policies, changing economic policies, LPG as it was called then, and its impact on the households. And I have seen the process actually growing. I was working with Joy then in the CWDS, and we would discuss for long about the absence of macro into the micro context. So why in the micro context of family, why we were not able to see the implications of the macro changes. I think besides that, I think what was also important contribution of the feminist critiques was how intersectionally we started to look at family. And so this question about disability, and Shubhangi is here. I can see her work and Professor Ganesh was her examiner, I remember. And she was one of my first students who worked on extremely important work. It was on families with autistic children. Besides that, how economic policies have impacted women in the rural households, and of course, urban households, household poor. Mahima Nayar's extremely important work on looking at mental health, how the implications on the mental health of people. So I think in this context, what I felt which emerged was a focus on care work. So care work, which I think Rukmini also mentioned, but care work is one field where Renu Adlakha's work and my own work in small ways on sorority, where I look at how women, of the family and extended family and also the community come together to support women who may have a child with disability and so on. So this is, I think, one very, very important area which has emerged. The other is a focus on the domestic help and domestic service. So if you look at the work of Amita Baviskar and Raka Ray, and there are some other smaller, works here and there, which focus on, whether the domestics are part of the family or not. What position domestic help has in the context of a family. So this is, I think, a very important and potential field of work, and especially it relates to work, it relates to their wages, it relates to class inequality, which which was something not really highlighted much, and it also relates to the caste inequality. So this caste question and the gender question in relation to family is something which is extremely important. The other related question is also about how in last 3 decades or so, families have been affected by displacements. Displacements, say, especially in the tribal context, and there are very important works in this context here, where they look at, how displacement has affected the kinship circles, and kinship circles have shrunk, and the families are left to fend on their own, and especially women are being the victim here. Disasters is another field, which is disaster and family, where the studies are not really coming from sociology, but more studies are coming from geography and social work. And then there are areas, conflict areas like Manipur and Kashmir. There are studies, Saiba Verma's work has come recently, where they are looking at, how in a conflict zone, how families are coping, and how women are coping, and how mental health has become such a major epidemic there. the next, before I go on to the pedagogy, uh, is about the link between family and neoliberalism, family and globalization. So there are some very important studies, as you also mentioned, Rukmini, about Sanjay Srivastav's work on middle class families, but there are many other, work besides Sanjay's work. Shalini Grover's work is there, which I reviewed for Indian anthropologists. Anita Mathur's work is there on consumption, family and consumption, extremely important work. And so these are largely, middle class women. And also there are works on, there is literature on use of assistive technologies, especially for and surrogacy. So these are some of the, areas which are also questioning our received wisdom about family. So family as a symbolic and cultural construct is something which is being reinforced in these studies. And of course, the gender and the queer studies have led to to a focus on more studies on masculinities, the role of father within the family. Radhika Chopra's work on father. Then on queer families, there are Gayatri Reddy's work, and then Weber Saria's work, recent work on transgender in Odisha. So some of these works have so much of potential to dismantle our very received wisdom about heteronormative, patriarchal, family construct that we have been teaching to our students. And in the, last issue is also about the transnational families. There is a lot of literature now on diasporic families. And for instance, I, take up food as one of the binding forces between the Indian families in India and transnational, context, where they are connecting, and they have actually carried recipes and food and interest in food, and how families in transnational context come together, and food becomes a site where they meet up, and they collect together, and they connect. So I think, since I have very little time, so I can take up questions also later. But in terms of methodologies, what I've seen is that there has been more work on ethnographic studies, and ethnographic studies, since we are looking at experience, we are looking at emotions, we are looking at affect, we are looking at contestations that are happening within the family context. Ethnographies have been extremely useful, and there are a number of good ethnographies that I just mentioned. Also, Shubhangi's work is there, Mahima's work is there, and Neeta Mathur's work is there on Tamil Brahmins, where she looks at the socialization process. So there are very good ethnographies where researchers have stayed virtually with the families, and observe the dynamics therein. But besides that, I think there are surveys that are happening, especially those surveys are undertaken by demographers and not so much by sociologists. Sociologists have not been in my own center. There is a work, there is work going on, like Divya Ved has been doing work on intergenerational mobility. So, and also aspirations. So she is also looking at families through quantitative, means. But demographers are doing more work than sociologists and anthropologists in this context. The other is that I have been using is cultural analysis. So I use a lot of ethnographic films and documentaries. For instance, in my gender class, especially to look at caste, gender, interface. I have been looking at this small film, Gili Pucci, which is a very, very important, film, and 15 minutes documentary on juice, which is called Juice. And it is like, almost what we are told, Great Indian Kitchen and, Mrs. So I think these films have been extremely important. I use a lot of Pakistani drama, though I might be called a traitor today. But I use a lot of Pakistani drama to actually show. Uh, and there is a very beautiful drama which is going on. I think all of us can see that, Parvarish, where they show the clash of values of a NRI family when they return to Pakistan, and everyday dynamics within which the teenagers are involved. So we have been focusing more on the parents, more on the children, but teenagers, adolescents are those who are extremely, active agents of making their own life. So that is something that I use a lot in my classes. Then during the COVID, I was teaching this course through online, and I asked the students to actually write their narratives of their experiences of being at home. So most of them had gone back home. And so being at home and looking at, their family situation and how they were trying to fit in there. And especially, it is notorious about JNU students that once they come here, they don't want to go back because they don't get the freedom and all that. But, it was so interesting to read their narratives. Then, of course, digital ethnography, which Rukmini, actually mentioned. Uh, uh, to supplement that, use of social media, like Facebook and other, contexts where to understand what the families try to represent. So, what is their virtual self and what is their, the real self? So, I think there are some studies which have come up, which I use in my gender class, and I also asked them to actually undertake some interviews with people who post a lot of pictures and posts on Facebook, and how do they make sense of that. So I think, to conclude, what I would like to also say one thing, that though we have been more concerned with how family studies have grown or declined, or again, reformulated itself in sociology and social anthropology. Uh, I see today family becoming more as a site for interdisciplinary research. So, for instance, Veena Das's very important work on partition and family. So I think, so historical, legal, sociological, and anthropological approaches are required to make sense of what is happening. So we have a lot of historians today who are working on, say, family in the 18th century or 19th, and especially Bengal is one case where the maximum work is coming. But also in Kerala and some other, southern state, not much is coming in, the North Indian states. But nevertheless, I think this historical work is very important to actually see how the family forms have changed, how their content has changed. So I think as sociologists, we need to combine, some of these approaches to develop our own understanding, and also introduce some of these readings. Although I know it becomes very difficult because we have so many readings which are already there. Nevertheless, giving a historical sense and a cultural sense to the students through literature, through movies, through because literature is also something that I use very often. It is possible to actually keep their interest going. Otherwise, family and kinship studies were seen to be too, especially kinship, to be too technical and boring and algebra-like. Nevertheless, I think giving examples from everyday life, from our field research, it becomes, I think, interesting for students to also engage with, and that is how I think I have been kind of teaching. So thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Professor Mehrotra, for that such extensive, rich elaboration of clearly themes through which family and kinship studies have undergone a transformation, and also the ways in which such rich methodological ways in which studying familial relationships, you do in your class, and what we see others also doing. But I think, one very significant thing that you ended with was family as a site of interdisciplinary research. And I think that is where, in some ways, the future pedagogy of family studies actually lies. And I was, if I may, before just opening it up for discussion, I was actually thinking, ma'am, what you said, that at some point in time within kinship studies in departments, where is gender, has been a question. And I've been teaching marriage, family, and kinship forms in AUD. And the last time that I taught, a student actually said in class that we cannot do kinship studies without studying gender. And there was, as if trying to understand this correlation between questions of gender, clearly meaning questions of power and relationality, as to understand a family, which is exactly what Professor Kamala Ganesh also said. How is it that we move from a harmonious understanding of family to power relations that determine family, and yet understand questions of social security, which family gives, which actually no other institution does in a legal, manner. And yet you bring in, Professor Mehrotra, how is it that there are nuanced, subversive ways through which negotiation happens within the family? So this has been an amazingly rich discussion from the two of you. I open it up for questions, comments. I would like to actually add that while Professor Tipluk Nongri is here, and of course Shubhangi is here, we also have Professor Neeta Mathur, amongst us. If I'm not wrong, we have Nupurnima as well, teaching, researching. We have Ujitra, and of course, many others. Many others. And Anurekha has been here since the beginning. So I open it up for questions, comments, discussions from the audience. You could unmute your mic and ask questions. You could raise your hand, whatever. Yes, Professor Tipluk.
Thank you so much for this very delightful lecture. The two scholars, Professor Kamala Ganesh, I'm very happy to have listened to you this evening. I've heard so much about you, but never had a chance to really meet you or interact with you. And what a pleasure really to hear you talk about family and kinship, going back to the ideas of Salila Bigwe, Irave, so on and so forth. And the same with Nilika too, who had given us a very good, exposition on the new developments on kinship and family studies in India. And I'm really grateful to Dr. Leena Pujari for inviting me here to listen to this discussion, the panel discussion. And I think the importance of organizing, a talk of this kind that is exclusively devoted to pedagogy cannot be overestimated. The rapid expansion of the frontiers of knowledge in sociology, has opened up vast space, new areas of research in areas which had not really been explored in the past. And I think also points to the very important need to revisit the tools, the methods, the technology that we employ both in teaching and research. And I'm happy to also hear Nilika talking about the onset of COVID, because it is also a subject which has really bothered me to a large extent, because the onset of COVID has certainly blurred the distinction between the family as a private space, a private domain, and work, a place of, which is a public space. The onset of the concept of work from home, for example, has no longer made the home, an entirely private space, and also has very strong influence on the patterns of social relations in the family. For example, I have had talks with lots of women, who complained that with the starting of COVID and the starting of this concept of work from home, women have lost the independence. The free time that they had for a little while when their husbands are away at work is no longer available to them. So this has added to their burden of work, and also has not really given them the privacy that they had in the past, that freedom. So I think how do we in sociology address this issue? Because this blurring of distinction between home as a private space and work as a public domain is no longer available there. The COVID has gone, but we still have the system of e-learning. My children, for example, both my daughter and my grandchildren, they still have to, at times, go to the computer and the mobile, to have their classes. So I think this encroachment of work or school, into the private sphere of the home, I think has very strong implications. How do we sociologists address this issue? Now, the other issue also, which I think Nilika has raised up, is about displacement. When we talk about displacement, caused by migration, the moving out of the children away from their parental home, which has created a condition what is known as this emptiness syndrome. Very often, I think in sociological studies, we tend to look at it purely from the point of view of the parents, the kind of hardships they're exposed to when the children are no longer there. But we also need to look as someone, who has gone through this experience, of having gone away from home, the kind of guilt that the children experience when they feel that they're not in a position to fulfill the familial responsibility that's expected of them. I've been living in Delhi for a long time. I'm sitting now in my mother's house, actually, in Shillong. I come here very often, So when my mother was ill, I remember that I was expected to be here with her all the time, but then also I had my duties at JNU. So that kind of guilt feeling that you go through because you are not able to fulfill the obligation towards your parents expected of by society. I think this is something which has not really been explored, by sociologists. So I thought that perhaps, in the new pedagogy that we are trying to, come up with, maybe these are the areas also we need to look a little bit into. It's just not my problem. I think many of us, who have parents and are not able to really discharge a responsibility towards them, maybe going through some kind of emotional stress or strain. So I think this is an area which perhaps family studies, can look into. The other thing which I also feel that we perhaps need to look into is, the middle class aspirations. Parents have educated parents. They look at education, as a means of social mobility. This also incurs lots of pressure on the parents in the first place in financial terms, but they would like to put the children in the best of schools. And many times you find that the tuition fees, are much beyond the reach of many parents, especially if they have to send their children to coaching schools, coaching centers, and if they want them to, sit for the competitive examinations. I think the financial burden on the parents is very heavy. So on the one hand, you have this aspirations, for your children. You want them to see them doing well in life. And then, at the same time, you have to undertake, many kind of new responsibilities, which are sometimes beyond your control. And I've known of families who had incurred debt on behalf of their children, because they wanted to give the best to them, but not within their means, which also has very strong implications on mental health, both on the parents as well as on the children. I think these are also areas which has not really been addressed very well in family studies, as far as I know it. Perhaps I've been out of touch actually in family studies. I retired 8 years ago, and I taught this course about 10 years ago. So therefore, my reading has not been really up to date. Maybe others have conducted studies in these areas, but I just thought that these are the areas that we need to explore. And also the other thing which I have noticed today is the onset of digital, technology. the mobile phone and the laptop, the tablet, in our homes, where we find that there is a huge digital divide between the parents and the children. On the one hand, you find that children are hooked to their computers, hooked to their mobile phones, and parents are getting agitated about it. And also, many people in the society at large, they see it not as a very healthy situation. That apart, we also find that, when the children are always hooked to their computers, or to their work or for entertainment purposes or social media, I think that leaves the parents really isolated. So do we need to look into these aspects also, in our studies? So actually, let me stop here because there's so many others here who would have, other points to raise. Just like to say that thank you very much for inviting me here. And I really love listening to all of you. And I cannot agree more with Professor Ganesh, who said we need to adopt a more nuanced approach to study of the family, and Nilika also says that we need to adopt the historical perspective along with the gender, dimension to be incorporated to family studies. I think these are things which are really, really vital and extremely critical, to have a holistic understanding, of the family and a more nuanced understanding of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tivlut ma'am, for that wonderful intervention and actually raising such important issues very interestingly around the child, the children, adolescence, and what do we do with that phase is something which is actually dominating OTT circles at the moment. But actually raising such important, valuable, again, affective questions around guilt, around, the complexity around aspiration, and of course, what do we do with the mobile phone and the digital divide? And again, bringing in, as we have discussed, questions of gender, questions of power, questions of a larger neoliberal world. There are a couple of questions in the chat box. I'll read it out. So we yes, please, ma'am.
Yeah, because these two messages actually, are important. Sohini Saha and Ria Chawla. Actually, since the time was so short, I wanted to actually talk about singlehood studies and also elderly. Sarah Lamb's extremely important work on being single in India is very, very important work, and where you look at different kind of households also, where she talks about how intimacy and responsibility, they all come together. And she talks about case studies where the women who are in a lesbian relationship, they are staying with their mothers and they are taking care of them, but they also meet very often because they are partners. So I think there are very interesting studies which are coming up. Sarah Lamb's work on white sarees and mangoes, ripe mangoes, or what, like, I forget.
It's
And
right, ma'am.
also, yeah, and also the other work on old age homes, I think, where they are becoming like more, they are being posed more like family structures. I think is something which, and I have included these works in my course outline. And the other Ria's work is also decline in marriage setups. In the Indian context, actually, there is some work coming on divorce. And Shalini Grover has been working on divorce, and Rukmini's work is also there in the court, where she talks about, the reasons and how courts read it. But this on divorce, she does talk about, the fact that more and more divorces are being more and more couples are going for separation to the courts. So these are more cases of estrangement and fewer cases of divorce. So we need, more studies of that kind. And then there are studies on matrimonial networks, especially digital networks, which also talk about that marriage is going strong. It's not going, something which is not on decline really. But we do need more studies on that, and why, despite the fact that feminists have also been posing very inconvenient questions about marriage and family, that marriage and family remain the solid structures of support to most people. Why they claim these to be the uh, important structure. And then maternity leave. Yeah. So, okay. So, Aman Priya Singh. Of course, I really don't know of any work, but maybe Rukmini will be able to say this work on maternity leave and the legal change. And Shubhangi's question is, of course, uh, is well taken. Okay, so Neeta and Nupurnima, maybe you can take it.
Maybe we could have Professor Neeta Mathur first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to begin by thanking both Professor Kamala Ganesh and Professor Nilika Mehrotra, and of course Rukmini and organizers for organizing this very, very important and interesting discussion on family, and it is really, really much needed in the present time. I don't have a question, but like Nilika, when Professor Ganesh were also talking about new areas in family studies, I think it would be very interesting and important in the present time to examine the dynamics within the family between the assertion or the collective identity of the family on the one hand, and the assertion of individual identities within the family. So it's like a family as a whole being projected, and the individual assertions. Of course, the whole issue of consumption comes in, and aspirations, as Professor Tipluth was saying, would also come in. So I think another way to look at it would be to examine or to look at the family from the entry point of consumption as such. And I say this because in the earlier studies on the Tamil Brahmins and old one, where consumption was not there, not so much there, was not so marked, and to the present day families where consumption is the characterizing feature, one of the main features, there is a lot of transition. There's a huge shift. So I think the internal dynamics within the family needs to be looked at more closely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mathur. Nupurnima.
Hi, thank you so much for this exceptional discussion and allowing me to be a part of it. Hearing about, interestingly, I'm actually in US family negotiations. My partner is in the States, and trying to make sense of all the discussions in today's meeting. One of, I think, the most recent aspect that is emerging in family studies and has been missed out, I felt, is the rising number of ENMs, polyamory or ethical non-monogamous marriages. Tarantino and Shivangi Gupta, they have, I think it came out in 2023, 2024, their paper came out in Family Journal. And they were talking about how these liberal notions and how liberalization and change in the landscape, political landscape, the economic landscape, is now also allowing for changes in the familial order. And even if ENM allows you to be polyamorous in an ethical way, it continues to be patriarchal. It continues to be oppressive in its in its nature. And I think that's one of the aspects that I felt, and again, I think it's important to also mention here. I mean, it's a humongous task to put family, marriage, and kinship under this one. It's extremely difficult. It's like, it's important that we have, these bifurcations to deal with these three elements. And it's, as Nilika ma'am also mentioned, that at this point in time, we need this interdisciplinary approach to look at family, marriage, and kinship, which has implications or ramifications from changes in economic space, political space, religious orientations and beliefs and practices. So I think the studies in family, marriage, and kinship is actually transacting a lot from all these arenas. That is all. I mean, and thank you so much for having me here.
Thanks a lot, Nupurnima. Shubhangi, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. It was a lovely talk. It really enjoyed listening to both the speakers. My question is actually, Rukmini, you mentioned the film Adolescence. And even though this is a movie that is set in the UK, it resonated tremendously, at least with me, because one could really see, the kind of lack of control or lack of knowledge that parents have about their children's internal lives as a consequence, not just of social media, but also the kinds of circles that they're moving in, which are completely unknown to parents. So I think one sees this a lot. I mean, as a parent, I also get this sense of really not knowing my children's internal life. What are their influences? What are they thinking? So this utter lack of, fit between, or this utter lack of awareness really about what parents think their children think and what the reality is something quite terrifying, I think, in the urban scenario. So I think that's also probably something that I just would love to hear the views of both the speakers on. Thank you.
Thanks, Shubhangi. Anurekha.
Thank you. I think it was, fascinating hearing Professor Kamala Ganesh, and I have always read works of Professor Nilika, but I've never met her. So it is, and also
Oh, we have met, I think, in Pune, in your department.
Yes. Yeah. And Professor Tilput Longri also, So I mean, I just one kind of an observation that for me, I never taught family studies. It was I taught at the UG level in our integrated master's course in Hyderabad. And when one brought in this whole, and I'm talking especially in the context of the pedagogical aspect of it, when I was talking about the feminist, especially in terms of the domestic, sexual division of labor and all. So very interestingly, there was a student who, for an assignment, I was asking them to creatively, so one part is like creatively think of how they relate to their idea of family. And one student wrote a poem about his mother having a conversation with all the utensils and all the things which are there in the kitchen. And I was fascinated by that poem, and I asked him why, because he said that I think most of the time I see my mother in the kitchen talking to herself, and so I imagine that would be her life, in having a conversation. And that really, and when he presented the poem, it really brought in a lot of questions and a lot of angst and a lot of guilt also about how they never looked at this aspect of the doing of family, what it is to be in family. So I just wanted to share that. And I think that for me in my course, Ketki Ranade's work on making sense of family and growing up gay in Mumbai, I think that also helped, because most of the time we had Leena Dubey's work on socialization of Hindu girls. So in terms of socialization, Ketki Ranade's work in making sense of the family, that really helped in bringing in a different kind of narrative. And also in terms of family planning, Jay Devika's work in terms of individual householders in the Malayali family. So that really also enlarged. So I just thought, but thank you, Leena, for putting this together. And of course, Rukmini, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks a lot,
No, I
Anurekha.
also add to Anurekha, uh, in one of my student also in the PhD coursework on gender, she focused on, she did not write a poem, but she focused on kitchen utensils. And, she did all her research on talking to women about their relationship with the kitchen utensils. So this was also amazing to me. And it was not just new technology, but the kitchen utensils, how they use it. And I remembered my mother when she got angry when we were very young, and she would just run with the balan or that I'm going to hit you. So, yes,
Yeah. On a different thing, I remember Professor Kamala Ganesh. I don't know whether you remember. I think when we were coming back, I don't remember where, but the tudupu, the dosa tudupu that you had forgotten to kind of check in, and a very interesting history that you had with regard to that.
Yes.
And a spatula.
No, it was a tadka.
Tadka.
The iron tadka maker, not like they are now, the old ones from my
Old one,
grandmother's
yeah.
time. Yeah. And the guy, I had forgotten to take it out and put it in a check-in bag. It remained in my handbag from Germany to India.
Yeah.
So the guy immediately caught me when I was checking in. He said, "What is this?" So I said, "Oh," then, I laughed actually. I said, oh, this is my grandmother's, what we season with. He didn't laugh. He didn't laugh at all. Oh, no, you can use this for bashing somebody. You please go back. I mean, strict German. I mean, I thought, I was going to he said, you either throw it away or you go back and check it in again. I said, I will not throw it away. I don't mind going and going back. And what impressed me was that what I saw as something of great value to me, it had memories and all that. This man had no sense of humor, no sense of the past. He said, you throw it or you go back. He didn't like my laugh, So anyway, that is still there with me. It's right here in my kitchen.
Yeah, I mean, this whole
my relationship.
the relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
But,
that's
maybe I could say something here, something that.
Please, I was just about to come to you, Professor Ganesh, your responses to many of the things that got this.
Yes. Well, fascinating. I can see that this subject is touching our, some chord in everybody, and also because I think the earlier idea of family kinship. I'm coming back to our the given topic. So the RC and family and kinship. We have a certain image of it, and our real life experiences of everybody here tell us that there is much more. It's a much more expansive with many dimensions and a lot of nuancing and all that. One point I wanted to make, I myself decided that I wouldn't talk about the pedagogy per se, methods of pedagogy per se, because I've been out of teaching for the last few years, but I found generally in the discussion that there doesn't appear to be any specific pedagogy that is coming out for the study of family and kinship, right? So what is coming out very strongly here is that family and kinship include so much more than what we thought it did. And it has so many relationships with other dimensions of life. So this, of course, we can, because when we talk of pedagogy, we are not talking about pure research. We're talking about how to convey this to the students. How do we get them interested? That I don't think we have, I think, said that there is so much more to the family and kinship that can be included. How do you convey it to the students? Nilika did mention films and ethnographies and so on. But it looks like it would be like any other sociological topic that we take up. What is the pedagogy of that? It is to be interdisciplinary. It is to use statistical research as well as ethnographic research as sociologists. So I'm not very clear, is that so we must widen our concepts, we must be familiar, rethink many of the concepts. All that is That is part of how you make the syllabus and how you talk. But pedagogical methods, I would still like to ask somebody here, do you think there are particular methods that are best suited for this area? This was one question that I had. Or is it that you widen your scope, you become sensitive to many other issues which you never thought belonged to this realm? But otherwise, pedagogically, it is like how you would teach any other sociology or anthropology related subject. I have this question in my mind. Second is that it is true that today it encompasses so many dimensions. It always did, but we managed to keep it under some kind of a straitjacket. So that, do we need a nomenclature like family and kinship? Because it is kinship and family is not the only dimensions that we are dealing with. We are dealing with relationships. We are dealing with a lot of things. We are dealing with women. So is that, or is it something like the domestic arena? I mean, we are dealing with the micro level of society and its relationship with the macro. So what is this, what kind of that was actually behind my question, new wine in old bottles. The old bottles are family, marriage, kinship. But what is happening is so many things are happening which we didn't notice earlier, and so many things are happening which never happened earlier. So for me, the question is this. How do we demarcate and how do we name this domain in terms of our teaching and in terms of academic life? And interdisciplinarity, of course, it has to be interdisciplinary. But the thing is, what is the pedagogy of interdisciplinarity? What kind of pedagogical methods and tools do we use for this arena, with some examples being given? Generally saying ethnography or statistics, that is okay. But within that, do we have, or we don't need to worry too much about that? Worry about the specific problem that you are dealing with and see what suits it best. These are questions in my mind that arose after listening to all these wonderful comments and presentations.
Thank you very much, Professor Ganesh. I just thought of a couple of things while hearing you and Nilika ma'am also talking about different kinds of methods. One of the things that I personally encounter, with my own PhD students doing work around questions of family and kinship. So one of the students did work around mediation centers, where, people would go when marriage is in crisis. And not being able to do ethnography really, but at the same point of time, sitting through the mediation sessions and trying to understand what is happening. So very interestingly, while studying mediation, which in some ways is understanding the crisis in marriage, through the field work that she did, she actually understood what does the institution of marriage look like? So it's literally like going back ways from, crisis to understanding marriage. There's another student who is doing work on interfaith, intercaste marriages and understanding the emergence of new domesticities. Now, the question, of course, is that one is not going and living in the new domesticity, in the domestic space. So, doing in-depth interviews, etc., is, the way to do it. So, in some ways, clearly studying family or familial arrangements or relationships is a difficult terrain. It is not something that can be very easily done. Precisely, just to think through what Professor Mehrotra said, precisely because one is dealing with experience, emotion, and affect. Since it is not easy, that's also the reason why there are multiple ways to actually understand that. And to the range of things that Professor Mehrotra mentioned literature, I'm also thinking of my own work around women's autobiographies and actually looking at how women in their autobiographies necessarily write about conjugality and family. And as if you get an understanding of what is family like through what women write in in questions of conjugality, but yet not saying a lot. So it remains a terrain one feels which is not easy for the purposes of study. In fact, Malvika Karlekar, when she did her work around domestic violence, this was something that that was articulated by her.
But my focus more at this point is that all these, you have to use innovative methods for new emerging subjects, correct? How do you transmute it into pedagogy? What you are describing is research methods, how to do research on different aspects using different methods, new methods. But we
No,
are
I
talking
think
about pedagogy. How does this, how do you translate this into pedagogical tools?
that is what, I was trying to mention that when I say that I use 15 minutes film
Yeah.
for understanding the familial dynamics, I think it is not me who's kind of conveying all the time. It is the students who are actually bringing in their experiences,
Okay.
their own family experiences to actually talk about, whether they relate to what they see or not. And many a times, especially when I show them Gili Puchi, they are also aware of their caste and gender privilege, because they speak about how a lot of things they say they don't think about, when they are talking about talking to a person from a different caste, and things are just said in a way that it is. For instance, there is one instance in this film where she has told her friend that her mother was a midwife, and then this particular instance is shared by this upper caste friend with her mother-in-law, and this mother-in-law actually gets back to the friend saying, oh, you guys are very good at handling these things. So she is using her caste and gender privilege. The other thing is also in terms of you know how she uses her friend into thinking that domesticity is her future. So because it's a upper caste family, upper caste, people also, yes, Rukmini has also, yes, Shelja Paik's work also. So, but,
Okay.
I'm talking about film here. So I think bringing in experiences and discussing how we understand the family structure, how we never understood probably a family life in a Dalit context so evocatively as we do through the film or through a story. So this is what
Yeah.
I was trying to say.
Okay.
And
Okay.
the other thing is like how a student, when he is writing about his own narrative of being in a COVID-19 lockup. So it is the kind of reflexivity the student is using and also connecting it to what the student has read or learned in the class. So I think these are the ways. So they make presentations. They make presentations in the class, and presentation is for everyone. And we have a class of 100 students. So it's also a very, very tedious job because thinking about 100 topics and 100 ways of doing things, it's not something which comes so easily. So pedagogy has its own challenges, but I think every teacher has to think about creative ways. So it's not that we will come up with something very specific for family studies. No, because we are sociology teachers. I think
Yeah.
there would be similarity in the ways we think about concepts and the communication of these concepts. But this creativity has to be, I think, understood in different ways, and I think each one of us bring in our own ways of putting it together and communicating it to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
student.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
On that note, that each one of us has to be creative in whatever we are teaching. And in this case, teaching something as historically rich, foundationally core, and yet interdisciplinary, like family studies. It has its own, creative challenges. And I'm sure this discussion, in some ways, one felt that it's a conversation that is happening between such senior academicians. I am sure that it would have helped all of you who have been listening to this. I'll now hand it over to Dr. Deepti Kaushik for a vote of thanks.
Actually, I'm sorry for butting in. Before I invite Deepti,
Please,
just a
Leena.
minute.
Yeah, yeah,
I
sure.
think I have to thank the panelists and, of course, Rukmini for those profound insights and such rich discussions. I mean, the number of works that were cited in the last 1 hour, and I made a note of all that. I think that will be immensely useful for our research scholars, for all of us here. So thank you so much. And I must thank Tiplut ma'am. She had said and she had promised that she will definitely try and sort of join. She had her, a little bit of anxiety about network and all that. But thank you so much, ma'am, for joining, not just for joining, but for sharing these wonderful insights with us. So much food for thought, in fact. I have to also thank Professor Maitri, because she was the one who actually sort of this idea of collaborative endeavors actually began with her, and she suggested that why can't RCs get together and do something, and which is wonderful, which is why this is here. I have to thank Rukmini, because when we were planning this, when Deepti and I were planning this, I think Rukmini came in with her very critical input. So thank you so much, Rukmini. And Kamala ma'am, yes, there is a lot in terms of pedagogy, because when you teach topics like gender and family, we know there's an instant connect that students have. So and your pedagogy can be a structural functional pedagogy, which may not really sort of bring much, but once, like as Nilika says, once you get them to reflect, there's a lot of reflexivity that comes in. So when you get them to reflect, whether it's a document asking them to write an essay, a poem, a lot comes out. So that is the kind of pedagogy that I think that we're looking at. With this, may I invite Deepti to propose a vote of thanks.
Good evening and namaskar to our esteemed speaker, colleagues, and everyone present here. On behalf of RC2 and Adhoc Group 1, I, Professor Deepti Kaushik, convener RC2, extend my sincere gratitude to all our respected speakers and RC members for joining today's session on Family Studies Today, Reflection on Pedagogy. I heartfelt thank you to our speaker for sharing their valuable insights in such a thoughtful and engaging manner. Professor Kamala Ganesh emphasized the need to study pedagogy and family together, pointing out how Indian sociology uniquely blends family and kinship studies, unlike the West. Her reflection on the sealed nature of family units and challenges in addressing issues like domestic violence were particularly insightful. Professor Nilika Malhotra added further depth of highlighting her experience of over 3 decades in teaching family studies, focusing on structural, functional approaches and linking family to caste, gender, displacement, and the impact of economic policies, especially on women in both rural and urban India. A special thank you to Professor Tilput for joining us and enriching the session with her presence. Thank you also to our moderator, participants, students, and the entire organizing and technical support team for ensuring the smooth conduct of this session. Finally, sincerely thanks to Indian Sociological Society for this valuable platform. Thank you once again. Thank you all for your time, effort, and contribution to this meaningful discussion. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you.